Where Americans see movies as a means of entertainment, the French tend to look on film as an art form. French culture comes from a rich tradition of the art of painting, particularly when you consider the work of the French Impressionists. It's no surprise that one of the most significant French filmmakers, Jean Renoir, was the son of the famous French Impressionist painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir. While there is an undeniable beauty about the work of the French Impressionists, there is another side of French painting that is every bit as influential, but mark a dramatic shift from the beautiful compositions to a more challenging, abstract work. In this unit of International Film Studies, we'll take a look at how the conventions of the French Surrealists also influenced French cinema. While we like to believe that the art of cinema began with the pioneering work of Americans Edouard Muybridge and Thomas Edison, a pair of French brothers are often referred to as the fathers of film. It was the Lumière Brothers who took the initial discoveries made in film and turned them into a more sophisticated means of presenting films to an audience. In 1892, nearly 15 years after Muybridge made his discovery, the brothers Lumière began to create moving pictures. They patented several significant processes leading up to their film camera, most notably film perforations, as a means of advancing film through the camera and the projector. The Lumières held their first private screening of projected motion pictures in 1895. Today, these films seem uninteresting. Workers leaving a factory and a train arriving at a depot. But the experience of these early films was so affecting that people would actually duck out of the way to avoid being hit by a train. The Lumières eventually developed little narratives out of their film projects. This film reenacts the old joke of crimping a water hose and letting it go when the person on the other end investigates to figure out what happened. The Lumière brothers eventually abandoned their film projects, considering them merely novelties not worthy of any real business interest. It seems fitting that it was a French magician who picked up the art of film and transformed it into something mesmerizing, and in doing so, introduced special effects to the art of filmmaking. The magical potential of cinema caught the attention of illusionist Georges Méliès, who exploited film to assist with his magic presentations. Eventually, Méliès created one of the first narrative films, A Trip to the Moon, which set a new standard for what was once rejected as a novelty. If American Edwin S. Porter's The Great Train Robbery was the first Western, then A Trip to the Moon was the first science fiction film. The shift from filming everyday activities to creating narratives, which presented abstract images and fantastical stories, reflects the natural progression of French film. As French cinema matured, this trend continued. The first significant French filmmaker was Jean Renoir. The influence of Renoir's father, the great Impressionist painter, was evident in the son's work as a filmmaker. Like the great paintings of his father, the films of Jean Renoir exhibit the same care with creating an impression through the artistic techniques of composition and the treatment of light and shadow found in chiaroscuro. Renoir's films often had something important and often challenging to say about the human condition, but the results were also visually stunning. Even these early black and white samples of Renoir's work exhibit a visual language that commands respect. But there was also a poetic realism to Renoir's film that communicated on deeper levels, providing rich and complex symbols and imagery. This requires patience on the part of today's filmgoers, particularly for American audiences who are accustomed to quick pace and rapidly changing imagery. It can be compared to the difference of traveling on a steamliner as opposed to a roller coaster. But if you're willing to adjust your viewing expectations, you will discover remarkable depth and insight in the work of Renoir. Among the most respected films of Jean Renoir are The Grand Illusion and The Rules of the Game. You'll study about these films in your reading assignment for this unit. Where the conventions of Impressionism influenced the films of Renoir, it was the daring artistic conventions of Surrealism that informed the work of the most famous movement in French film, the New Wave. You'll read about the influences of the New Wave movement in your reading assignment, but it's important to consider how historical events shaped the core values of French culture and how the art of that culture reflected these core values. The effects of World War II and the occupation of France by Nazi Germany have left an undeniable mark on the outlook of the French people. One of the results was the evolution of the existential philosophy of the period. Developed and explored by Frenchmen Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, existentialism is a philosophy that takes a rather bleak perspective of human existence. The existentialists believe that there is no inherent purpose for our lives, that existence in and of itself is absurd. No doubt intensified by Nazi occupation, they believe that there is no guiding moral authority that ensures a proper outcome of events. Human existence is ruled by each individual's own self-interest, and outcomes are arbitrary. To the existentialist, the only valuable thing is the freedom that comes from making individual choices that are not necessarily a part of society's core values. As you have already guessed, this runs counter to the romantic, melodramatic point of view of our own culture. The existential philosophy is best reflected in the surrealistic art movement of France. The surrealists took everyday reality and warped it into something corrupt and absurd. The famous clocks of world-renowned Spanish surrealist painter Salvador Dali is the epitome of this technique. While not a Frenchman by birth, Dali moved to Paris and had considerable influence on surrealism in France. In fact, Dali worked with filmmakers in France to create surrealistic films. The surrealistic impulse is evident in the films of the New Wave French filmmakers during the post-World War II period. You'll study the French New Wave and focus on a central figure in that movement, filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard, in your reading assignment. The New Wave movement took a completely different approach to film than did Jean Renoir and his followers. Rather than creating a poetic realism, New Wave filmmakers called attention to the process of cinema by intentionally breaking the rules of filmmaking, which called attention to the fact that you were watching a film. This was a technique that was first employed in the theater by German director Bertolt Brecht, referred to as epic theater. By having the characters in the film look directly at the camera, or by making intentional jump cuts to shake the audience out of the illusion of the narrative, the New Wave filmmakers were warping reality much in the same way that the Surrealists did with their painting. New Wave filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard would often do a personal voiceover during the action, commenting on the meaning of the action, or making comments that didn't seem to be related to the action at all. In his film A Band of Outsiders, the characters ask for a moment of silence. At this point, all sound ceases and the characters wait until the moment is over.
Une vraie minute de silence, ça dure une éternité.
Ok. 1, 2, 3.
This stop in the action calls our attention to the fact that we are watching a film. In doing so, It makes us think about the meaning behind the film. It also represents a form of freedom for which the new wave as well as the existentialists yearn. You'll cover the groundbreaking and rule-breaking methods of the new wave filmmakers in the video entitled Breaking the Rules. So as you study the rest of the material in this unit, focus on how historical events shaped the core values of French culture and how this affected the conventions and iconography of the progression of French cinema. We'll catch you next time.